most everyone knows about Dragon Ball. I grew up on it and was absolutely obsessed with catching every episode I could, so trust me, I know. It was the first anime I ever saw subbed when a friend's relative showed us a fan-subbed VHS of Fusion Reborn before Cell was even over. Why did Piccolo have such big lips and such a dirty mouth? Is that Hitler? Holy shit, Goku and Vegeta fused! What an experience that was. I played Dragon Warrior on the Game Boy, not even knowing of the legendary connection. Once I had internet and a bit of awareness, I'd eventually use that opportunity to expand my scope of Toriyama's work. I finally finished Sandland after having caught a good chunk of it in the same issue of Viz's Shonen Jump that I discovered One Piece in. Kajika was a good time, and Nekomajin is just Toriyama taking the piss out of Dragon Ball. And I did read Dragon Ball, but it was in some awful quality, let me tell ya. Like many a jaded internet goer, I ended up rolling with the common critiques and fell out of love with it for a good while. I did revisit it on the Ninshow with my good buddy Mathwiz and found a new appreciation for it, leading to my discussion of one aspect I came to enjoy just blowing the fuck up for some reason. Dragon Ball is still a story I love a lot, even if I could never recapture that feverish devotion I once had to it. And another big part of my love for it back in the day was the games. Not all of them. I could not figure out Legendary Super Warriors or Legacy of Goku for the life of me. How can Goku not beat up a wolf? Hello? But the hours I sunk into the Budokai games would no doubt make my present self blush. Budokai 3 in particular would be my game of choice. The instrumental of Ore wa Tokotan Tomaranai blew me away. Nowadays, the visuals don't excite me in the same way, but seeing that tease of Super Saiyan 4 and Omega Shenron once had my jaw on the ground. And those opening sounds still bring a bit of teary nostalgia to my eyes. Tenkaichi Budokai was fine, I played that one a lot too, though the opening made me and my brother bust out laughing the first time we saw it. My strongest memories of Budokai 3 are of the story mode and of my rivalry with my younger brother, where we all too fittingly mained Goku and Vegeta. We were average players at best, but our battles felt legendary. I'm pretty sure the last one that we decided as the definitive one, where we found out who was better, I lost. Vegeta would take much longer to get his W in canon than he did in our brawls, though I might have just sucked at video games. And then, a year ago, Toriyama passed away. There is only one other time I was affected by the death of another I didn't personally know. Even with Miura, as much as I enjoy Berserk, it just wasn't the same. In a sense, Toriyama's been with me a long time, and the universal appreciation of his work across mediums is something that can't really be matched. A lot of people I know went back to Dragon Ball, which is fair, it's still and will always be a great story, but it was one I didn't go through too long ago, and I wasn't feeling like jumping back into it at the time. And when I do go through it again, it'll be the anime in its original language. I, by chance, had already read Dr. Slump the previous year, generally finding it amusing and always finding it artistically impressive. Though if you give it a read, maybe do a chapter a day or something, take it slow. I did play Dragon Quest V, continuing my journey through that joy of a franchise, but overall, rather than going down familiar ground with stories or characters or settings I already knew, I decided to acquaint myself with Toriyama in a different fashion. Just a year or so before his passing, I had discovered, fully translated, works Toriyama was involved in that I hadn't heard of before, consisting of nearly a dozen chapters, a short animated OVA, a game trilogy on the Super Nintendo, and one handheld spin-off. Go-Go Ackman just completely flabbergasted me in the fact that it existed at all. I'd been aware of Toriyama for around 2 decades at this point. I touched a lot of his stuff rarely if ever brought up like his shorter, non-Dragon Ball manga, so when this whole trilogy just apparated out of nowhere, fully in English, the games aren't even on his Wikipedia page. But well, I got curious, and after his passing, I got into it. I'm lucky that I'm the kind of person who doesn't find his experience with art wasted. I like to think that every experience is valuable, even the ones I don't particularly enjoy. The Go-Go Ackman games can be, kinda jank. As 2D action platformers, they tried my patience with leap of faith jumps, the too often mediocre sub-weapons. The bosses often don't feel like they're made with the timing of your moves and range of your jump in mind, while steep hills turn absolute fodder into mild annoyance. There is the occasional good gag, but more often than not my persistence left me more frustrated than fulfilled. It wasn't until the third one where it actually started to feel fine to play. But even so, I actually ended up enjoying the Game Boy entry slightly more. Rather than an action platformer, it's a Pac-Man clone where you have to pick up souls while avoiding enemies. The skill curve is either just above failure or close to mastery. Every time you take damage, you lose half your souls, and you only die when they're all gone. Like Sonic Rings, this means you just need 1 or 2 to survive. Having 8 or 16 is the same as having 4 or 5 health, but if you're going for perfect, One hit becomes absolutely devastating to your score as you can lose dozens to hundreds of souls. Coasting by is nothing difficult, but getting those perfects will be utterly grueling, and some of the enemy spawns are really unfair. That said, I didn't know about the role until checking a random video after playing the game, so that's probably a skill issue on my end. Maybe I suck at video games. That said, my favorite part of Ackman is actually in the OVA and manga one-shots. The gag of Ackman being a pretty tolerable devil in contrast to the uninhibited and sinful angels is worth a good few laughs. But it's not without a pretty big caveat. So there's this pretty sus mechanic in the game where Ackman can beat up women enemies to get health back. This is in reference to the source material in which Ackman is shy and awkward around women. Or I think it's a reference. Somehow. Since he's a younger protagonist, I think the latter is pretty cute on its own merits. But when his arch enemy Tenshi realizes his weakness to women, he calls in Josephine, who's not a cis woman. And Ackman is suddenly not awkward around her anymore. And yeah, it sucks. Even putting aside the change in values across time, it's just the same tired joke left exactly as I've seen it for nearly 30 years since I saw the first Ace Ventura. It's problematic and really unfunny, and kinda always has been, which was a shame watching the OVA because it was legitimately making me bust a gut up until that point. Oh no, not the school bus full of children. She appears in the games, but there aren't any jokes of that nature. However, remember how I said I found Ackman 3 to be the one that clicked with me the most in a gameplay sense? Yeah, in the story sense, it's another matter. Specifically in the major antagonist Raphael maybe? Being a leather-clad buff biker angel is one thing, no problem in itself, but if the gay stereotyping wasn't enough of a flag, the sexual harassment of a character with the look and personality of a minor is not preferable, to say the least. However, I have to be real. The funniest part of Ackman has nothing to do with what Toriyama or any of the game writers put to text. No slight against him, Toriyama can write some great jokes, but sometimes reality just takes the cake. Bill Ackman, narcissist, piece of shit billionaire, as opposed to not piece of shit billionaire, what am I saying? Believes himself to be the source of inspiration to Go-Go Ackman, citing the main character having gray hair as a child like he did at 9 years old. And the name, that's in actuality probably the combination of Ack, the sound effect for a scream or other exclamation, and man, like the superheroes Toriyama loves to draw and reference. Does he think Cashman is a reference to him, too, because he's rich? Just kidding, Cashman is in poverty. Bill would never. Actually, wait, rich asshole named Bill? This man is a fucking cartoon character, maybe he's got a point. But what kills me about it is that he bemoaned not getting royalties. Soul-stealing demon with gray hair as a child, just like me, for real, for real. Wouldn't defamation be their first response? What are you up to that we don't know about, Bill? Sheesh, I couldn't make this up if I tried. Moving past our little idiot demon, the kid too, Tobal is a franchise I only found out about when poking around for this video idea. It did get an English release for the first title, and the second one is known for having one of the largest rosters in any fighting game, but for me it was a totally new discovery. Toriyama's designs have their recurring commonalities, but Tobal stood out to me compared to a lot of his other work. Udon is interesting because he evokes Beerus a good 20 years before Beerus. But Mufu, Homs, and Mary in particular don't give me a lot of vibes of his other characters throughout Dragon Ball, Chrono Trigger, or Dragon Quest. Not that you wouldn't recognize the style immediately, and he's not a stranger to using or reusing various design elements across the dozens to hundreds of designs he's contributed to those works. The polygon look isn't the best at getting that element across compared to the artwork, of course, but even so I found Tobal to be a fun time. I'm not much of a fighting game player at all though, especially not for 3D ones. Tobal in particular doesn't have a lot in the way of video guides, writing, or tutorial, so it's not like it's close to being approachable as a modern fighter might be. The grappling system in particular has a lot going on, but unpacking its potential interactions is well beyond me. One AI strategy is literally just to run at you until you get pushed out of the ring, making me feel like an absolute child when it works.
So cute, baby.
I played through the tournament mode a few times, blowing through it as Chuji, but it turns out not all characters are equal. Oleums honestly might be my favorite character in the game on concept alone. Even though the characters give off more serious vibes in their designs for their more human proportions and smaller eyes, where the nature of the game leaves little room for comedy, Oleums is a Kentuckian, i.e. from the planet Kentucky. He's a chicken. One of his attacks is even evocative of the chicken's movements. The concept didn't make him easy for me to pick up though. I was in tournament for a good 4 minutes, feeling pretty good for having gone through a few relatively manageable battles with a character I hadn't touched before, Then I got to Faye, and this old man proceeded to kick me around the arena for a good, 15 minutes before I learned to play more defensively and how to block. Certainly, it was just a bad matchup, and I'd be able to blaze through the The man proceeded to fly absolute circles around me while bopping me on the head and recounting all my insecurities bit by bit as he shaved my soul down for half an hour of minimal progress before the recollection of the handful of characters I still had beyond to fight pushed me to my breaking point. I didn't take it very well. No! No! Why would you do that? Please. Please just let me win. I'm begging you. Please.
You're doing a great job. A great job.
I don't consider myself to be very good at games. Using FromSoft and Souls-like as a metric, my greatest ability isn't my technical skill, it's my persistence. I can beat any challenge in those games if I throw myself at it for long enough. My enjoyment and will proportional to how easy it is to retry a challenge, how doable it seems, and my overall goals like 100%ing or whatever. I still haven't completed Tobal number 1. Not really. I never even legitimately unlocked the final character and only beat tournament mode with the starting roster on normal, never even trying hard. After this loss, I wasn't just thinking about dropping Tobal number 1 though. As a then 32-year-old man whose experience with fighting games was basically just Smash, I already felt as though that ruined my habits back when I briefly tried to get into Street Fighter IV since I instinctually wanted to spend a lot of time airborne. In my defense, trying to get into a rather old fighting game with almost no help or tutorial outside some basic rundowns and move lists wasn't exactly giving myself the best fighting chance, but it would save myself a lot of future heartache and trouble to just pull the cord on the whole genre now, right? If I was never going to be able to properly get into it, then it wasn't worth the effort. But that thought didn't sit well with me. Why was I playing it in the first place? Well, because I like Dragon Ball, a series where characters regularly aim to better themselves and test that against others through martial arts. Because I was curious about other works Toriyama was involved in, a man whose first manga debuts, the 2 one-shots of Wonder Island, were complete failures. I didn't want to give up, even if it was something that didn't matter, like a mildly interesting fighting game no one but myself was playing. It wasn't Oleum's, it was me. I was the big chicken man running from an immensely important video game genre with tons of depth and history because this literal input reading CPU ass was making me feel worthless. Ultimately, applying myself to surmount this relatively low challenge wasn't a big investment worth a training montage. I spent a little time in training mode better learning Oleum's moves and gave it another shot. My true dive into a fighting game will come another day, but in comparison to the 20 minutes I once spent trying to learn how to wave dash and the 10 minutes I spent in Street Fighter IV's training mode, this effort actually did bear results. The RNG gave me Chuji much earlier in the rotation, but Gren gave me a pause for a good while, and I only barely scraped by a Hom on a timeout. My next foe would make me wish I'd been stuck on literally anyone else. I really wasn't stuck on Mufu for very long, but his weird and hard to gauge attack animations seemed paltry next to his worst quality. His fucking voice.
Continue. Continue.
After all the sweat, tears, and piss, the final boss somehow only took me a little over a minute thanks to his small size and my dazzling array of low kicks. The victory scene showed that Oleum's has a son. Given his lack of canonical name, I have decided to christen him Nugget. However, the most interesting feature in Tobal, the one that would potentially have me coming back to it, is the quest mode. Drawing from RPGs like Rogue well before the term roguelite would fall into fashion, yes, it's a non-RPG dungeon crawler with procedural generation predating Spelunky by roughly a decade. In particular, the potion mechanic, where each run has a pool of potion effects assigned to random colors, no different than Rogue, Stone Soup, or your pills in Binding of Isaac. I'm not the biggest consumer of this style of games, but even today a fighting game roguelite would feel novel, and here we are, 25 years ago. Filling out the minimap appeals to a certain kind of autism of mine. It's fun to see what kind of new monsters and wildlife the game will throw at you so you can beat them to death. But, it's not all great. The jump is only so useful as an option, but the game expects you to use it heavily after a certain point to dodge traps and platforms. In general, it's super brutal, in particular on the last dungeons. Anyone who got through to unlock the last character deserves some praise from me. It was too much for me to accomplish without using... But I did get Toriman. Had to beat arcade mode with a character based on the subject of the video itself and all, and then accidentally quit out of the arcade mode during its final boss and have to redo it from the beginning, all to see if there was an ending movie for Toriman. There wasn't. Tobal 2, however, boasts a much expanded quest mode, and it's the only way to engage with about 95% of the massive roster. Still bigger than Sparking Zero's launch roster, more and longer dungeons, a town overworld expanding on mechanics from the first game with a full-on shop, save point, and warehouse to store your extra stuff. Food has been given more utility with a stamina bar, meaning starving in a dungeon becomes a real possibility, and foreshadowing, as you juggle stat bonuses from eating while full to the longevity you get in exploring with a pack full of food. Also, the bigger roster means more wildlife to punch. Dinosaurs, bears, emus... Oh shit, new lore just dropped. I didn't know Chuji was Australian. One thing I think is neat is that they have different weaknesses to discover and account for. Great Helms take low damage from everything but grapples, Red Caps have low health but take 1 damage from every hit except for falls, Birds attack and block low, Dinosaurs are strong and don't like to block at all, Apes take way more damage if hit in the air, etc. Beat up wildlife, sleep, beat up wildlife, eat, sleep, wake to beat up more wildlife, live the dream. Drink random potions indiscriminately and prove the white women right because the crystals do have magic powers. Wait, no! The potions are just essential oils, aren't they? Don't drink that! The addition of more mechanics gives a lot more depth, so I'd recommend the Kao Megura quest mode guide on GameFAQs before and during your play, and this Tobal 2 tips video after you've acclimated to the basic mechanics, because the on-screen dialogue is in Japanese and there's no commentary, so you'll only be able to tell what's going on if you have that base knowledge. My favorite is that you can combine equipment to compile their boosts together, positive or negative. Best displayed as the maker of the video combines a bunch of defense down crystals throughout the game, throws it at the final boss, and beats him in like 3 hits. Gotta love it. To offer 2 tips that I don't think either of them have, one is that resting while poisoned doesn't recover your health, but still drains your stamina, so don't do it. Secondly, if you're playing on an emulator like I did, I'd recommend using save states in between dungeons instead of using the in-game save system. Potion color randomization doesn't happen per run, it happens per time you boot up the game, de-identifying potions you've already drunk and shuffling the colors. Save states are a concession to keep the in-game save mechanic from arbitrarily punishing you for using it by deleting the information you've already worked to get, since every other thing you do is carried over properly, from stats to equipment to progress, and it more closely evokes later rogue-derived games where potion or equivalent types are maintained throughout the single run. But alas, while my potion knowledge carried over, my in-game knowledge was shown to be lacking. After punching my way through dungeon number 2, the pyramid, after a good 5 to 6 hours of attempts, more sweat, tears, and piss, I finished with no food in my bag, belly, or the nearest shop. Rushing to the next dungeon, I discovered that the sprawling, empty maze is only full of robots who never drop food, which means my destiny was to starve to death. Realizing that yes, in fact, I do suck at video games, I decided to try Tobal 2 again another time. Though I have a severe deficiency of getting good, it's the game here I'd most recommend so far. Pass on the first one and go straight into the second and you might find a good time. I find it really interesting and my lack of fighting game fundamentals are only keeping me from beating it now, not ever. Of the games I wanted to cover for this list, there's one big omission. If you've been watching this screaming at me, wondering why I've yet to talk about Chrono Trigger, then you clearly haven't forgotten about Chrono Trigger, and talking about it wouldn't quite be in the spirit of the video. Even if you haven't played it, you know about it. It's been a celebrated game for as long as I've known about it. It's accessible. If you can get over the Steam version crashing way too often, just play the original version. I haven't played it, but just play the original, trust me. It's a really good time. But as I was once surprised by learning about works that Toriyama was involved with in some capacity, I'd rather shine a light on that which maybe doesn't get as much attention, because much like Chrono Trigger, I've also been very aware of Blue Dragon. I remember when it came out, 2 rather middling reviews, released on a platform known more for catching a particular demographic and audience interested in multiplayer shooters rather than 3-disc solo JRPGs. I've always liked JRPGs, especially on the Game Boy Advance, but around this time period I unknowingly let myself be led along by the general mindset that JRPGs were dated or not worth playing. I wouldn't have said I disliked them, but aside from Pokemon, I kinda stopped, not really sinking any time or energy into them. And it wasn't really until a few years ago when I started my slow replays of Pokemon at the same time I parade into Dragon Quest proper and Megami Tensei for the first time that I really remembered how much I liked JRPGs. While Blue Dragon, at least to me, isn't as unknown as Tobal or Ackman, it is still a weird victim of its time, released on a console that wasn't super popular in Japan, and in the West wasn't known for appealing to younger demographics or players of JRPGs. It's only properly playable if you own a console in a market that's shifting more and more to cater to PC players, unless you're a wizard with getting Xenia to run it properly. The player behind the YouTube Blue Dragon Xenia playthrough admitted to some difficulty, and I myself couldn't even make it to the first combat on Xenia. I also didn't own an Xbox One before setting out to make this video. And after saying all that, after going through quite the journey to finally play this awkward piece of gaming history, capping off the discussion of this video, all I have to say is, you have played Chrono Trigger, right? If not, you should. How about Dragon Quest? Pretty solid games there. Just in the process of making this video, I played 5, liked it a lot, 4 is still my favorite, 3 is also good. Blue Dragon? Well, no, it didn't turn out to be some sort of secret masterpiece or lost favorite I never got the chance to try out. I probably would put it a bit lower on the list of JRPGs I've played in the last few years. Its presentation isn't mind-blowing, there are some fine mechanical ideas, but a standard playthrough won't be too challenging, and much like Chrono Trigger, once you go in with an understanding of the fight, a proper party and equipment setup will make all the difference. It's fine. You could do better, and I'm sure you could do a lot worse. But I don't want you to think that means my time with the game wasn't worthwhile. It's a fundamental, simple JRPG, but I really like those. Are you the kind of player who will check every one of those dang barrels because there's probably something there? I am. And if you are, you'll either love Blue Dragon or it will give you some kind of anxiety, because the amount of searchable little items on the map is, a lot. The one mercy is that whether you find something or nothing, you can only check each place once, for the most part. Those somethings can include gold, experience, or even stat boosts, which can be great at early levels. At high levels though, nothing is worth more. No, not the piddling amount of gold and experience, literally nothing. The game will keep tabs of every time you find a nothing, the Nothing Man rewarding you with items based on how many you've found, not dissimilar to the mini-medals in Dragon Quest. And now you know, hopefully before you play the game if you ever do, because I didn't, and I wish I did. What you were probably more looking forward to seeing was the class and skill systems, which allows for a fair bit of customizability and player expression, though unfortunately it'll be a while before the player can really mess around with them, as you'll only get enough SP to reasonably max the skills of 3 or 4 classes in one playthrough, unless you go Barrier Mage and make heavy use of its field barrier to gain SP at a quick rate without combat and more or less max your skills with much less grinding. Is this kind of a necessary? For the easier difficulty, yes, much like bothering to EV train and get ideal natures to beat fucking Lance or something, like bro just use super effective attacks. Even using it, I did run into a few tricky bosses I was unprepared for, the final one in particular, but nothing a retry or general lack of first playthrough blindness wouldn't solve. Good equipment choices and proper skill setups can go a long way. One thing I think highlights the difference between it and Chrono Trigger is in how much Toriyama's fingerprints are visible. He's not a game developer, of course, nor did he really offer much to any of these games past some level of character design. Tobal perhaps, but I couldn't find any good interviews, period. Ackman, he made the source material, but I would attribute his lack of presence on Wikipedia to the fact that he didn't contribute anything past the original source material, which can also be said for the plethora of Dragon Ball games missing from the list. But he did have an influence on production. For Chrono Trigger, his artwork and designs gave the staff a lot of ideas to work with. While this may have been the case with Tobal and Blue Dragon as well, what strikes me in looking at the two of them is, well, frankly, Blue Dragon feels a bit more like his work. With roughly a decade between them, it's something I would be more likely to attribute to Toriyama's relative popularity. The difference between a manga author who's been popular for almost a decade domestically, versus a manga author who's been popular for twice that long in Japan, plus a decade internationally. Leaving a staff that had spent much longer with his work in a media landscape further entrenched in the likes of Dragon Quest and Dragon Ball. I mean, it doesn't feel like an accident that the main antagonist, Nene, is an old bald monster seeking to restore his youth. Or, as some would call him, Toriyama's work on Blue Dragon can be called unrestrained in its echoes of his body of work. Dragon Quest is couched firmly in its fantasy aesthetic, But while Chrono Trigger dips into the sci-fi and mecha territory Toriyama can display with his detailed designs, Blue Dragon goes a little bit further into that, and even parts of his iconography not touched on in other products. The slime enemies in the game? Yeah, they're shit. Literal snakes, coiled up like shit. Dr. Slump, Toriyama's first massive success, shows itself here in a way I don't often see reference to as part of his legacy. Probably because it's childish and therefore embarrassing. I'm an adult, however, so I only give a shit when I need to. And where I need to requires water. The poo snake enemies are weak to water. You flush them, you see. It's dumb and funny, and I feel people far too often forget that's how Toriyama made a name for himself. Because that was only true domestically. Internationally, it was his more serious stuff that got him fame. And that's part of why I appreciate Blue Dragon. It isn't completely unserious, not even close. It even ends off on a mildly interesting note as magic is returned to the world. A great power that once threw the world into chaos because those masters of it were allured by the possibility of what endless magic power could do. This same sentiment echoed from the past is stopped by children possessing that same power, but refusing to be corrupted by it because they are pure and innocent, their ideals simple yet actualized. But even if Blue Dragon isn't my favorite game talked about here, what the game happens to capture might be the most true to his body of work, despite his relative distance from all of his games. Maybe this is a weird way to pay tribute to such a legendary creator. Here's some things he kinda worked on, I guess, but he did work on them, even if he wasn't the most central to them. And in them I saw aspects that reminded me of what he had done, and things I hadn't quite seen in other aspects of his work, even when just talking about designs. It's kinda like hearing about a friend of yours from another person, another perspective, and learning something new. Obviously, Toriyama is not a friend of mine, but he is someone I've been aware of for a long time, largely through aesthetic, and through these games I got a bit more. More of the same, and more of something different. It's another perspective on someone who's no longer here. It's as simple as that.